Hey everyone, I'm Allison with Better Half Reviews, and today we're going to talk about Mine 77. This is a crowdfunding game made by Dragon Dawn Productions. It is a game for 1 to 5 players and takes about 90 minutes to play, recommended for ages 12 and up. So let's talk a little bit more about the game. Mine 77 is a competitive game, and you're going to be moving through 3 different days. You have a morning phase, and then you have an afternoon phase and night phase. You'll do that 3 times and get to the scoring for the end of the game, or choose to do a long game and do 4 days. There are many unique resources in the game, like materials, food, medals, and specials like gems or magic. Everyone has the same deck of cards to start with. You're going to shuffle them up, and then you're going to choose one as your action. Everyone reveals their cards at the same time. Depending on your priority number is when you will take your turn. In this case, I'm doing a farming action, and I get to collect some resources. And as you collect resources, you're going to be putting them onto the train. You do get to choose where you place it on the train, and you'll also get to place your own meeple on the train, and then reset the farming grounds by moving resources over. You could also choose to go on patrol and go through the tunnels and see if you can find some good resources. But you don't know what you're going to find along the way. Each meeple will take their own path, and you may take some hits. But hopefully the rewards will be worth it. Depending on how many hits you took, you may end up needing to go to the hospital. It'll take a little bit of work to get those meeples back in your possession. If you need a little bit more of precious gems, you can go mining and try to get some of that copper or steel. Again, those will be loaded onto the train, and hopefully that'll help you with making today's delivery. There are plenty of actions that use steam, but you can also refill it as well. You don't want it to go too high, and you also don't want it to go too low. There's also a processing plant, so if you have too much of one resource, you can trade it in and try to get something else more useful. There's even an elven embassy where you can collect certain resources to get some good rewards, like magic or points. You may do some research to unlock hard-to-come-by resources or unlock more storage on your board. If you need some more unique cards to help you out, you can go to the commissariat. But at the end of the day, you can choose to ship the train on over and hopefully meet today's goals. If you don't, there may be some negative consequences, but if you do, you'll get some bonuses. At the end of the 3rd round, whoever has the most points will be the winner. Alright, so now that you have a general idea about the game, let me tell you about my pros and cons after playing this. Okay, so let's start with the pros. So one of my pros with this game is I like the aspect of like the give and pull of you are working kind of together to try to fulfill the order each day, but this is still a competitive game where you're like, I need to try to keep some resources, or I don't want to like give everything and you know, maybe make other people do some more work, try to get different rewards. So I like that you're kind of working together, but you're also trying to do your own thing in order to be the best. So it's like, you want to help the government, you want to have people help you out, but I want to keep some stuff for myself, and also maybe try to get some upgrades, get some new cards, and the elven embassy. So yeah, I like the aspect of like trying to like help, but not help too much with other people, but at the end of the day, you still need to fulfill the order. So it's kind of an interesting aspect to it. Something else I like about this game are the rosettes. And you earn them throughout the game by completing different things, etc. But, and at the end of the game, for every 3 that you have, you can get victory points, which is nice, but you also have the option of like boosting and using those for actions during the game. So I like the kind of like push your luck aspect of like, okay, these could be potential points for me at the end of the game, but I'm going to spend them now because I want to do some overtime to try to get some certain resources that we're missing out on. So I like having that aspect of like, okay, well, like, do I want to use it now and get some stuff now, or do I want to hold on to it to maybe use it later? So I like, it's kind of like a wild resource, not necessarily, but it has different uses, and so I like having a little bit of variability in this because this game is very, very tight, and it can be difficult to do certain aspects and try to take certain actions. So like that rosette is like, oh hey, if you want to spend that, you can do that. And magic kind of has a similar way where it's like, oh, it's kind of like a wild, like a helpful thing that you can use when you're short on other resources or even short on actions. Speaking of resources, I do like all the fun little shapes that the resources have, so it's kind of unique having like that little mug of beer and like little pieces of wood and rope and etc. So I like having the different shapes one of just a tiny con is like I wish they were bigger pieces. They don't have to be. I just kind of wish that they were. I'll get back into that later. And I'm a fan of games with rondelle systems, so I was intrigued when I heard that this one had 2 in the game. Not many games have multiple rondelles. I know a couple of them. But yeah, so I liked that aspect of the game. It's like, okay, well, there's this tinier rondelle. You can move your worker around and try to get some different cards and other things going on. But the bulk of what you're doing is more on that bigger second rondelle, collecting resources or mining and going off exploring through the tunnels. So like that strategy of, you have these certain cards and you're playing them down, but you have to kind of go between your different workers who may be on different rondelles. There's a lot of different strategy and timing that you're going through. So it just kind of was interesting to try to figure that out as a gamer. All right, so now that I've talked about my pros, let's talk about some of my cons, or maybe some things that you might want to be aware of just as a potential backer. So some of my cons, I did mention before, like I like all the unique pieces and it's really cool, but they're all really tiny. I kind of wish that they were a little bit bigger, just to make it easier for like handling or seeing them, the differences. I don't know how you would really make them much bigger because you want them to fit on the things that are going on in the board game. It's not a deal breaker. That's just something that my personal preference. This game can feel a little bit challenging. Like there are a lot of different rules. There's a lot of different steps for the different actions that you can take. There's steps just to be able to take actions that could get negated by people playing the same cards. So like this game can have some like frustrating moments of like, I was going to do that, but now I can't. Or I really wanted to get these resources, but I can't. Or so this isn't really like a fluffy game. It's not where like I'm gonna go do all these actions and complete all these things. This is a tough strategy game that also has a bit of luck to it because you don't know what other people are gonna do. So the times like I understand like that's what it's going for, but sometimes I struggled with having the frustration moments of like, they canceled out my action. So it just kind of like it can be tough. So if you want a game where you're able to do everything that you want to do and like get all the cards, get all the resources, this is not one of those games. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that you should be aware of, that this is a tough game. It's a tight game. Resources are hard to come by. Cards are hard to come by. So it's just kind of like a tough and challenging game. And since there are so many different rules and different actions that you're doing, for me, it was a bit harder to keep things in my head at first. So like the first like 5 or so games, I was really relying heavily on the rule book. Like you do have little help like player aid cards, which are good for like a quick reference, but like for the step by step of like, okay, when you're doing I don't know, like the research or something, you have to make sure to do these steps. So like I was using the rule book a lot to make sure to follow, okay, do this, now do that, now check for this. So it's not necessarily like bad, but there's a lot to know and a lot to learn when playing this. And if you're not playing games pretty quickly back to back, you're probably going to be using the rulebook a lot. One of my negatives, and I understand this game is supposed to be harder, it's supposed to be more difficult and challenging. Sometimes it felt extremely hard to get resources on my actual board. It felt like it took too long for me to kind of figure that out, be able to get resources. Because initially when you're getting resources, in many ways, it's going collectively. It's going to the train. And so it just felt like it was like a bit hard to actually get my own resources other than like going off and like going through the tunnels and hoping I get good things, but hopefully not dying as well because, random attacks. So sometimes I felt like the game was too tough just because it wanted to be tough. So it kind of felt like I was trying to find that balance between like what's tight and what's too tough. But the more that you play it, I feel like you kind of start to see that balance, but sometimes again, I was still feeling frustrated with not being able to do everything I wanted to do, even minimally. And since this game is kind of like dark and moody, worker, in the mines feel, like I feel like the vibrancy of this showed with that, but I kind of wish that they would lighten it up a little bit. Some things just seemed a little too dark on the board. That's just my personal preference. But again, this is a prototype, so things could change. Alright, so those are some of my pros and some of my cons, some things to be aware of. Overall, I thought the game was alright. It's a bit of a dive to get into and a lot of things to go over and keep track of, but like as you were getting the flow of the game, it's like, oh, okay, I'm starting to see some of the strategy coming out of when to play cards and how to try to get more resources and maybe using my rosettes and working my way towards unlocking more space on my board. So I feel like you get the strategies of it the more that you play it, but if you're not willing to put in the work for it, you may not have that payoff. I do still feel like sometimes it's a little bit too tough of a game to accomplish stuff that you want to or need to. So like I feel like sometimes I was still getting a little bit like frustrated at not being able to get things done that I need to. Yes, I know you can't do everything in this game, but sometimes I was still feeling like a little bit stuck. But the more you play it, the more you're rewarded with understanding some of the strategy. But yeah, so if you're interested in Mine 77, I'll put a link in the description down below. And hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a like and subscribe. I'm Allison with Better Happy Reviews. Happy gaming!